Well, thank you for joining us again. We're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 11 today, and as we go and we finish up the book of Ecclesiastes, we have chapter 11 and chapter 12 left to go, and then we'll be completed. And chapter 11 really talks about young people and what young people need to do to prepare as they get older. Chapter 12 is going to speak a little more about people in their older age, or what we can expect in our older age. But chapter 11 really tells us what do we need to do to prepare for our older age. And I've kind of titled this one Life's Investments. Life's Investments. And we invest in things. We're going to reap later on what we invested. You know, we reap physically what we sow physically. If we're not exercising, if we don't stay in shape, then as we get older, we'll reap the consequences of that. We also reap financially as well. As we're going through life, we should be preparing. We should have some way of saving up money so when we get in our older age, we can reap that. We reap socially as well, to the relationships that you and I build with other people. As we build those relationships in our younger age and our older age, we can have stronger relationships. We build in our family relationships as well, and we invest in our family. And if we invest in our family when our children are young, hopefully we can reap the benefits of that when our children are older. And just because we sow good seed doesn't always mean we're going to reap good seed. But if we don't sow seed at all, I promise you we're not going to reap anything whatsoever. So join with me as we look at Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 1 through 6, as we look at life's investment. Well, as we look at the first point here, I've entitled it Expected Return from Your Investments. And read with me as we look at Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 1. It says, "Send your bread on the surface of the water, and after many days you may find it." Now, we need to look at some other verses here to understand exactly what King Solomon was referring to. If you just read this one verse, you can take it a bunch of different ways. So turn with me to 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 22. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 22. And we read this: "For the king," and this is King Solomon, "for the king had ships of Tarshish at sea at Hiram's fleet. And once every 3 years, the ships of Tarshish would arrive bearing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks." Now, the city of Tarshish, we've heard about the city of Tarshish before, and it's in the book of Jonah. Jonah was trying to go to Tarshish, and it was a great port city, and this is where fine jewels and things like that were shipped, and great ships and vast ships was there. So as we look at this, we can see that he was heavily involved in the shipping industry. So what he's saying is, when I put my grain, I put my things on the ship, and I send the ship out, I'm expecting those things to come back. And you can use the same analogy as a farmer. That's why I'm here at these grain bins to think of the same thing. As a farmer sows his seed. Well, just because he sows his seed, there's no guarantee that the seed will produce a good crop. There's no guarantee that if you send the ships out that they're going to bring back trade. But there's an investment there that he is making. I'm going to send my ships out, ships being plural. I'm going to plant my seed, and I'm planting my seed. I'm sending my ships out to receive a lesson, or to receive a blessing. And the lesson that we can learn here is this: the grain must be taken from the barn and be invested. We must take the grain from the barn, from the bin, and we must invest it. And God has given us all gifts that we must invest those gifts, and we'll look at that a little bit later on. But here he was knowing that there was going to be a return for his investment. Well, how do we know that we're going to get a return for our investment? Well, the first element is trust. We must trust that we have faith that if we plant the seed will come up, the seed will germinate, the seed will grow. We must have trust that if we put our goods on the ship, they will go and they will come back. We must have trust if we're going to make an investment and we think we expect a return on our investment. We must have a commitment. There must be a commitment that we're going to do it. We can't leave the grain in the bin. We must get it to the field. We must commit to that. And if we don't commit to it, if we say, well, I'm going to halfway do it. I'm going to back my pickup truck up and I'm going to take some grain out of this bin. I'm going to put it in the back of my truck and I'm going to plant it, but I'm not really committed to planting it. Well, if you don't commit to plant it, if you don't see the task all the way through, you're not going to reap a return on it. So you have to be committed. But not only do we have to trust, there has to be a commitment. There must be patience. There must be patience. Look back. How often were those ships going and coming? It says every 3 years the ships of Tarshish would arrive. It takes time for those ships to leave one port and travel to another port, bring the goods back, and you can make that trade. It takes time. I think about a farmer when he plants his seed, and when they plant the seed in the ground, they struggle sometimes, maybe, I hope it comes up. I have faith that it's going to come up. And they probably ride that field every day looking and looking and looking. And there's probably no greater joy on a farmer's face was when that seed breaks the ground. And they can look, and the next day there's every kernel has come up in that field. And they have this patience. They must wait. We must have patience when we expect a return on our investment. Verse 2, I believe we see we need to have a diversity in our investment. Look with me in verse 2. It says, give a portion to 7 or even 8, for you don't know what a disaster may happen on earth. So he's telling us that, listen, there are going to be disasters. There are going to be floods. There are going to be hurricanes. Not every ship that he sent out came back. There were some that storms hit. There were some that capsized. There may have been some that pirates even got. I'm sure they had pirates in those days as well. But I can think about a farmer. If a farmer decided, all I'm going to plant is corn, and I'm going to plant corn in this one field, he better hope and pray that we have a bumper corn crop. The market is in high demand for it, and he gets lots of rain on that one field. What Solomon is saying here is this: don't put all of your grain on one ship. Don't send all of your grain to one port. Don't plant your one field and one crop, one species, one seed. Plant multiple seeds. Plant multiple seeds in multiple fields. So in case the plight hits one, you still have another one. In case one field doesn't get rain, the other field does get rain. Another thing that he could be saying here is he could be saying this, is be generous in your work in giving to the Lord's work. Be generous when you give to the Lord's work. There are different people, different pastors, different ministers, different Christians, that they have a heart and a burden to feed the homeless. Well, that's great. We need to feed the homeless. There may be someone else that has a burden and a compassion to spread the gospel to some foreign country. There may be someone else that has a passion to help laymen or help pastors and encourage pastors. But it takes all of these things that we need to do to do God's work. We need to be diverse. So verse 2 talks about a diversement. But look with me in verses 3, 4, 5, and 6 as we look at guard our investments. We need to expect a return on our investments. We need to have a diversity in our investments, but we also need to guard our investments. Look with me in verses 3, 4, 5, and 6. If the clouds are full, they will pour out rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, the place where a tree falls, there it will lie. Verse 4. And one who watches the wind will not sow, and the one who looks at the clouds will not reap. Just as you do not know the path of the wind, or the bones in the womb of a pregnant woman, so also you don't know the work of God who makes everything. We need to make sure that we guard our investments. We need to observe the events and the conditions that are going around us. One of the ways that we can do that, as we see in verse 4 and 5, we don't need to procrastinate. We do not need to procrastinate. We need to don't be afraid to take that first step. You've got to take the first step. You can't wait till everything is just perfect. And when it's perfect, then I'll get started. It's awesome to watch a farmer go out and prepare his soil. And he is preparing his soil, waiting for the rain. That's what he's talking about here in these verses. Go ahead, get started, make that first step, and then when it rains, put your seed in the dirt. there are times when we've had to go back and we've had to rebed or we've had to replow because we didn't get a timely rain. But when you do get the rain, there may be a short window, a short opportunity for you to invest and get the most return out of that investment. So if it is, that's when you need to make that investment. You need to make it on that day at that time, and you need to be prepared for that. Don't be afraid to take that first step. Don't do your work sooner rather than later. In verse 5, he talks about the wind. We don't know what the weather's going to hold. We just had 2 hurricanes that just hit, and the first prediction they were going to hit Florida, and then they moved from Florida to Alabama, from Alabama to Mississippi, Louisiana, and I think now they've hit in Texas. So we don't know where the wind of the weather is going to go. We have better forecasts than what we used to have, but we still don't know. He even talks about an unborn child and how the bones form, and if you look at a ultrasound, we can see the baby developing. We can measure the bones, and we know that this baby should be so many weeks old inside the mother's womb, but we still don't know how that baby is formed, and that is one of the great mysteries, one of the great miracles that God has given us. So what he's saying in verse 5, the last part of verse 5 is this: the ways of the God define human explanation. The ways of God defy human explanation. I don't know what makes a seed germinate. I don't know what, I just know that God's hand is on that seed, and all of a sudden that seed pops forth and it starts going. I don't know how a hurricane forms and how it dissipates. I don't understand those things, but I do know those things happen, and those things are in God's hand. I read this, and I don't want to read this to you. It says, sow your seed. You may not understand how a dead seed can go into the ground and spring forth into a new life, multiply itself many times, but we are to sow anyway. We are to be proactive and aggressive, not sit back and wait until the conditions are ideal, because the workings of God are a mystery. So we need to guard against procrastination. We also need to guard against complacency. Look with me in verse 6. Verse 6, in the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not let your hand rest, because you do not know which will succeed, whether the one on the one or the other, or if both of them are as equally good. We need to guard against complacency. We must work and work every task from morning to evening. Put all you got in the task that you have, because there's coming a day when you will not be able to work. And I believe he's also saying this: we need to work despite the least ideal conditions. We may not have the best conditions in the world that we have to work in, or whatever it may be, but we still need to give it our all. We need to do everything that we can possibly do. In closing, I want to share this with you. And this is what I think, if we sum these 6 verses up, this is what I think it is. And I wrote these 4 things down. We should sow in more than one field, and we should send out more than one ship. Think about the ministries that you have. Don't focus just on one ministry. Focus on multiple ministries. Focus on more than one field. Focus on more than one ship. The second point that I think we can get out of this is we should accept some ventures to flourish, and some ventures will fail. But just because one fails, don't be devastated by that. We know that all good things happen for God. Everything that happened, it's going to be good for God, and God's going to get the glory out of that. But sometimes you and I don't see necessarily the glory that he's getting out of it. But understand, if we're in God's will is where we need to be, and God's will be accomplished, and his glory will shine. The third thing that I think we can get out of this: we should not allow fear and failure to hinder us. Don't be scared to take that step. Don't be scared to go get the grain out of the bin and put it in the ground. You have to separate yourself from it. You must put it in the ground and expect something to grow and something to come back from that. And the last one is this: we must trust God for the results. Trust God for the results. Be in God's will and trust him for the results. As I look at what Solomon did, I go back to the New Testament in Matthew chapter 25, verse 14 and 28. You read the parable about the talents, where the master gave the servant the talents, and he commended the one that had the many talents, and he gave him even more talents. And as I think about that, I think about the gifts that God has given us. Here, Solomon used grain in a bin or in a barn. He used about ships and sending things out. But one of the things that God has given us, and God invests in us, he invests in us spiritual gifts and talents. And are we using those talents the way we should? John chapter 9, verse 4, we read this. We must do the work of him who sent us, and while it is still day. And night is coming when we can do no work. Night time's coming. So as you are in your young age, and if you're alive, you're in your young age, because you're going to get older if you're alive today. While you're alive, work. Work for him. Work for his kingdom. So my answer or my question to you is this, or my statement to you is this. Each and every one of us is going to be held accountable for the gifts that God's given us. And one day Jesus is coming back. And when he comes back, he's going to ask us, what did we do with those gifts? And I would like for us to just take the advice of old King Solomon and do it while we still have time. While you still have time, take the things that God has given you, and let's invest them wisely. And let's expect a return on our investment. Let's diversify our investments, but let's guard our investments, for they are a gift of God. And once again, I love you. I care for you dearly. If there's anything I can do to help you or be of service to you, my name or my contact information will be at the end of this video. Once again, I love you, and God bless.